Well, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to get us all loaded up here, and thank you for joining in. For everybody who's been tracking along with this, as you'll remember, 3 weeks ago when the election was first announced, the city council had put out a few asks, and we had started talking about as a council, like, what are we going to expect from this federal election? How do we draw issues back to the city? How do we bring attention to the issues that we're feeling? And of course, as we progress into this election, I felt that it was really prudent to get into actual one-on-one discussions with our candidates. In my role as a city councillor, but also as a voter, certainly not speaking on behalf of council by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm able to at least make comment on, hey, look, these are the things council's talked about. These are the directions that council want to go in. How do you respond to that, candidate, whoever we are? So we've interviewed Don Paulin with the NDP. He was our first candidate who we interviewed here a few weeks ago. This first of last week, we interviewed Wayne Long. And now I'm going to bring him up. We've got our PPC candidates, Nick Pereira. How you doing, Nick?
Hey, good, Brent. It's great to see you. And as I mentioned, behind the scenes, it's great to reconnect with you again.
Yeah, it's been, we would have connected in 2011, was it?
Oh yeah, it was like good 7-8 years ago when I met you, before we were both bald and bearded and beautiful. I was like, tonight is the bald and bearded
I know.
episode.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, years ago, and I had no idea I would be in politics, and I never knew you would be either. So it's really cool to be speaking like this. Yeah.
It's cool. It's when I left, I would have left. I think we met. We started talking about some networking stuff that we were doing at the time, and I was selling cars. And then it wasn't too long after that, I got a job offer at.
I thought you left for a bit.
Yeah, that's right. I was gone for 6 years. So.
Oh wow, it was that long.
Yeah, I got married and now moved back here in 2016. So anyway, it's the world revolves in small circles sometimes, and
sometimes it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we wanted, obviously we're zeroing in on this federal election, right? It's where we're in this post-COVID recovery situation, and we want to talk about the issues and how they affect our city, and what each candidate and what each party is bringing to the conversation. So I'm just going to make sure I can see all the socials popping up. I see some people chiming in there. We've usually had about 20 or 30 people kind of view in. And of course, for anybody who's watching at home, this interview will be is live, and it will be up on YouTube, be up on Facebook and Twitter. So I'll see your comments coming in. I won't be able to get to all the questions. Anybody who's emailed me questions, I'll certainly get those first, because as I said, we put that out there a few days ago and made sure people had a chance to email me. So I want to respect the people who got in line, if you will. So that'll be something we'll get to at some point. And other than that, I just wanted to start off, Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about why are you getting involved in politics, and how are you doing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate the question. Yeah. And I think it's an important question. Why? That's a question that drives me in my personal life. I got involved because my background, so to understand a little bit about me, is I've spent about the last decade studying different cultures, philosophies. I'm a coach and trainer by profession. I've been a life coach to many people, a sales and business coach. I now practice it's out there, and I'm getting written about, my semen retention practice, which seems to be controversial, right? And I'm very open about it because it's a wonderful practice, and I can't wait for more men to learn about it. But I say this because look, if it's weird, and if it's intriguing, and if it challenges our current mindset and it makes us better, I'm into it. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I've really been enjoying the journey. Now, like most people at the beginning of the pandemic, I was not paying attention to politics at all. Could pretty much care less about it. But what I started to see with the pandemic is not the pandemic itself, but because I like to look at other things that are going on, I started to notice the bills and the laws that were coming into mandate, and some of the bills that the Trudeau government and the Conservative government were backing, and I could see the hints of far left mindset coming in. Now, I'm not saying everything from the far left is bad or that it should all be rejected, but I did start to see an unbalance in Canada where there is no more real strong right-wing conservative voice. And whether you're conservative or not, or whether you're going to vote for me or not, I want everybody to understand that balance is needed in a society. So yes, we have a very strong look, when you're not the popular guy in the room, all right? Like I'm definitely right? Yeah. I'm definitely not the popular guy in the room in the political space. However, I will say that the PPC is the fastest growing political movement in the country since the election started, and more people are waking up to the value that we bring. We are asking questions that no one is willing to ask. We are asking questions that, quite frankly, mainstream media is not asking or talking about. And we feel it's important to ask these questions and have all sides of the political spectrum represented. So I got involved because I felt a duty to represent a whole group of Canadians, millions and millions and millions of Canadians here in our riding and all across the nation who are not being represented. And even though we may not be the most popular or our ideas right now may not be what's cool, the more people that hear our ideas and hear what our candidates have to say, the more people are going, you know what? At least some of it makes sense. And at least these guys are willing to ask questions that, quite frankly, none of the other parties right now are asking.
Right. Well, whether or not you're popular, whether or not you get voted, what I think you're doing and what I commend you for doing is putting your name forward. And, our democracy is built on people who believe something and they're willing to stand up and make the case and let our neighbors choose. And I think that, once we get away from that as the best kind of bedrock of our democracy, and we start putting, labels on people and try to disqualify people, we've done that for centuries. We've disqualified people based on their race. We've disqualified people based on their orientation. We've disqualified people based on their education, and that can't be what it's about. It's certainly not healthy for democracy, and it just creates isolation. So I certainly, thank you for running and being a candidate. And anytime we get to do that, it comes with, we're under the microscope, right? So like you said, people are asking questions, people make opinions, and usually good St. Johners are not afraid they don't hold those opinions too close. They are willing to voice them.
And you know what? Yeah, you got to be tough skin. You got to be tough to get in this game. And I knew what I was putting my hand up for. It's quite intense. I'll tell you, it's more intense than I imagined, and I'm getting more attention than I imagined. I just had what's his name? Dean Blundell.
Really?
From Toronto? From Toronto. Dean Blundell wrote an article saying a PPC candidate holds his semen or something like this, or right, and this type of thing. And actually he put an invite to be out on his show. The something, what was the other one? The Post Millennia or something like this. They just did an article, breaking news. Semen retention soldier is running for the PPC and all this type of thing. And what's really interesting about the whole thing is that the more they try to slander me, the more they try to make me out to be some weirdo, the more people are getting intrigued. So I say, thank you for the advertisement and bring it. Because once people learn the knowledge that comes, and I'm not just talking about the senior section, but once people, I'm telling you, I'm telling you that I have some value to bring. Yes, maybe I win, maybe I don't. But at the end of it all, there will be some peoples whose lives will be better simply because I've asked questions that no one else is willing to ask, and have conversations that no one is willing to have. But that's how I want to do politics difference. The PPC, one thing that attracted me to the party was the statement of, we're doing politics different. And I want to do politics different. And the way I want to do it different is I want to have these brutally honest conversations about the way that we live overall. And because these are some of the brutal conversations I've had to have with myself. And my life is not perfect. And I got challenges like everybody else. And I don't want to come across like as somebody who's not like everybody else that has all the answers. But I will say that I do want to present some questions and some ideas that are fresh and different, and that may challenge some people, but it's okay to be challenged. That's how we grow.
100%. Yeah. Well, let's just get into them then. That's great.
Sure.
First one we're going to get into is, we got the why and what you think of the party. What's sticking out to you in this election so far? Like, we've got, every election, people want to think that there's one ballot box question, and there never is. It depends on the person. They'll have a different order. They'll have things they care about. But what are you picking up on, as you come on as a candidate, issues that are local to St. John that you hear everyone talking about? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that the two main things are coming up for in the conversations I'm having is one, how was the COVID-19 pandemic handled? How is it still being handled? This is a huge issue for many of us. And, it's something that is not coming up right now. I appreciate you allowing me the space to talk about it, because I find it very interesting that in some of the like I did a candidate forum, I think a few nights ago. We're doing one tomorrow. There's a debate coming up on Wednesday, and nobody's asking questions about COVID and how it was handled. And to me, this is one of the number one topics on people's mind is, what does Canada look like as we move through the pandemic? What and how do we handle it? Justin Trudeau said that he wants this to be he wants to be judged on the way he handled the pandemic. And we say, yes, we will judge on the way the pandemic was handled. And I have a lot of questions about the way it was handled. So that's one thing. And the second thing that's much more localized to us right now, but it is a nationwide issue, is housing. And what we're going to do about the housing challenge that we're clearly running into right now.
Yeah, it's no secret that housing is the main thing that got me involved in anything, actually, in St. John in any major way. I mean, I was working for different groups, and had different passions, but when I started to encounter our rundown buildings in our neighborhoods and things like that back in, when I first moved back here in a major way, and then that led to the tool library, and it's just led me on a journey and trying to raise the alarm about the fragility we have around housing. So I'll definitely be picking your brain on some of that housing stuff. But with regards to COVID, because it's not one of the questions that I have set aside to talk about, that were either asked or I've been asking candidates, what is it that, what questions do you have that obviously a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts to this. How did we handle COVID? Did we do something too fast? Did we do something too slow? Did we have the right approach to vaccinations? Do we need to go further on that? Obviously, a lot of provinces now, conservative or liberal or NDP, are taking that next step to say, we need these passports, we need all this stuff. So I guess you mentioned that you had some questions around how COVID was handled. Let's say you become a candidate, or you become the MP. Say something happens, you become the MP. Your first day on the job, you've got these burning questions about COVID and the direction you want to take. Where do you go with it? What do you ask? What do you shoot for?
Yeah, the first thing is, why was the vulnerable the most with this? Okay, at the beginning, we didn't know a lot.
Mhm.
And we can go along with I mean, I bought toilet paper like everybody else did. Okay. All right. Like, you know what I mean? I paid way too much for toilet paper. All right.
Yeah.
Like everybody else did. And we stocked up and we stayed home and we wore masks and we did the whole thing because we didn't have a lot of data. But as you know, the CDC and the World Health Organization and many other organizations started releasing data, it was clear, at least from what I've seen, that that there was that the most vulnerable were people that were elderly and people who had existing conditions, and that the actual death rate of people was very low. So to me, it was so simple. I did a video before I decided to run. Just when I started speaking out, I was like, well, what else is going on? Why is it that Walmart is allowed to stay open, Costco's allowed to stay open, but my corner store West Side guy had to close at 5 p.m.? Why was Canadian small businesses not considered essential, but multinational corporations considered essential? It was we could have given the opportunity to Canadian small businesses to really step up, but we didn't. These are the questions I want to ask. To me, it makes no sense. Why was it that we can all pile into Costco? I mean, if they were really scared of us all dying from a pandemic, we would have been seriously locked on, shut down. But half of things stayed open. Canadian small businesses had to shut down. This is the question I want to ask, and I want Canadian people to, and people in our riding to be asking. Why was it that we were so hard? Why is it being so the vaccine? Why is it being pressed upon us so much? And now we've learned that the passports have an expiry date. So even if you've taken the 2 shots, it's now setting up for a 3rd shot, a 4th shot. I want to ask the question, how many shots is enough? And I am challenging, this is not a popular point of view, but I'm challenging that maybe perhaps that we've been a little bit misdirected, or this has been a really good marketing campaign by Big Pharma. The propaganda and fear was incredible, and we didn't have to scare people because there was a pandemic. We could have handled it in a much calmer, more sensible way. Protect the vulnerable. Lock that down. Make sure the old folks' homes, the old folks' homes. Make sure the hospitals were tight, but allow the small businesses in Canada to flourish. I believe that the fear propaganda had a much more political twist and agenda, which may put me in the conspiracy theory category, right? That's what we get labeled as. But I think that these are very valid questions that we should be talking about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, my opinions on the matter to me are moot. But I do think one of the traps we can fall into, as you're saying, because I certainly agree. Like you said, we didn't know enough at the beginning. What I'll agree with is that it did seem like there was some incoherence around who had to stay open, who wasn't allowed to stay open, who was making that call. And that was very frustrating to people whose livelihoods were certainly wrapped up in it. And I know friends of mine whose businesses they lost, trying to work through that. I know friends who are still trying to recover. And I think what you're saying is, who made that call? Why did they make that call? But I guess what we have to be careful of in that is to say, look, we're going to assume that the decisions were made with a callous intent, with an intent to promote some other company or some wealthy corporation. We don't know that's the case. We know that those wealthy corporations have too much influence on our government. And we know that lobbyists can persuade in ways that the average citizen, even if they're a sensible citizen, can't. And that's certainly frustrating. So I get your point. I don't want to steer us into. I don't want to steer us into what was the secret? What was the secret motivation of Justin Trudeau? Because I firmly believe every human is trying to do their best with the information they have. But at the same time,
this is where I encourage people to. It's funny because we all live, and I would have said that I have tried hard to live my own life always assuming the best intentions with everyone. I do, though, just put out, again, to me, it's a question to explore. Think of it as food for thought as opposed to something that you have to accept.
Make your mind up on.
Right. I'm not asking anyone to blindly accept what I'm saying, but think of it as food for thought. And here's the food for thought. Okay. History has shown that the world is always redrawing its maps. That the maps and political agendas are always alive in this world. Mm-hmm. And when we look at how political maps are drawn, or how in this newer world resources are gathered or influence it's made through policies. So and it has been known in history that sleight of hand or deception type, the art of war. The first rule of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which I recommend everybody read if they want to get a little bit more insight into political tactic and strategy. This is something not talked about, but this is, again, right. It's misdirection. Show the left hand, but what's going on in the right? The news has been completely showing us the topics of the pandemic, which I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe in pro-choice. I'm not saying the pandemic was fake. I believe it was real. I do believe there's some questions about how it was used, though. And then you'll notice what don't they talk about, though, is they don't talk about the bills that are being pushed within our House of Commons that slowly are eradicating personal rights and freedoms. Now, some people may say we have to give those up because we're in a pandemic. I'm saying maybe, but maybe not. Right. And maybe we can be questioning these things. So I just want to give some food for thought.
No, I get you. And I'll take that for sure. Cool. No, that's legit. That's good to be able to put that together to say, look, what's the context? How would you operate that? How would you navigate that question? Okay, so the other question that we have is, you say you weren't involved in politics too much before. You've been tracking. You've been paying more attention over the past year. Obviously, you've taken that next step to put your hat in the ring and say, I care about an issue, and I'm going to fight for that issue. And I'm going to try to persuade other people that it's worth talking about.
That's right.
So let's say, what do you think? Looking at the state right now, you look at our city. I know you said you're in St. John here. So what do you think St. John as a city, as a community, needs from our next federal government, and then from our candidate as well?
Yeah, I think that first of all, what we need is real conversations about issues that are sometimes uncomfortable. For example, let's talk about healthcare as an example. Every other party that I've heard so far, so Mel and Wayne and the different candidates all speak about healthcare from a federal funding perspective, throwing money at it. And I want to present the thought that money itself does not solve problems. Why don't we talk about some real things like the fact that we eat unhealthy? I would love to see a government that, in my opinion, really cares about the well-being of its people. So is therefore willing to challenge the people to say, hey guys, let's eat a bit healthier. Let's talk about how our soil is being sprayed and how these issues are directly impacting us. Let's talk about the mental health, the drug addictions, the suicide rates, and not just from, well, how much money are you going to give to it? Because that's all the other candidates are saying. We got to give more money and more money. What I'm saying is we actually have to bring our conversation down to a street level, to a level on the streets where we do politics a bit different, where we're willing to actually go and say, hey, maybe what we need to do is work with organizations more on the ground. We operate by a principle that government works better when it's closer to the people. So let's empower some non-for-profits. Like I met a lady that works out of Connection Work. She's starting a non-for-profit, wants to help women in the city. And I'm saying, hey, why don't we provide maybe some education or training around these type of organizations that will be far better suited to handle the problems of St. John. Remember that I'm going to also say something that's not going to be very popular overall, but it's the truth. We're a federal party, so we don't pander to ridings, meaning I am not going to lie to you and tell you all of this federal funding I'm going to get you, because here's the reality of our country that no other candidate is willing to tell you. We are $354 billion in debt, maybe upwards of more. We are broke as a country. So what we need to do is actually tighten up our strings fiscally. If not, we're all going to be paying the invisible tax that kills nations, which is inflation. And when we talk about reducing federal funding, what we're talking about is reducing the federal government's power and influence and allowing provinces and municipalities more leeway to actually deal with the problems of their community.
Part of me, there's two pieces to that for me, and not again, I want to drift too far into my opinion on this because this is about your presentation, but you make up, you bring the point. Okay, what I'm hearing you saying is the St. John needs a candidate that is going to pull together our spending and make it sensible and targeted at the right things, but then also bring those conversations about reforms into how we do things to a higher level, not just the ground level, not just the street level, but to put more things on the table to say it's negotiable how we do these things. Maybe we shouldn't just be throwing money at the things the way we've always been doing them, but now we really should be talking and having a conversation with more stakeholders, nonprofits that maybe could approach this problem differently. On the topic
innovation. Innovation is important. And one of the things I'm saying overall to the community is, look, if you want the same old, you got four choices, right? If you actually want something different, like new ideas, fresh perspectives, I'm going to bring things to the table that talking about how we work. Like, a lot of people don't understand how we work as a human being. Right? If we want to have these real conversations, like how our foods affect our health directly, I think that these are worthwhile conversations that will really bring something different to the table. It'll be different. And that's, to me, that's what I'm asking St. John Ross say, look, you want the same old, you know where to go. If you actually are ready for something different, that might scare you. It might challenge you. It might be like, I don't know. But if you're willing to take a risk and actually look at something different, then I'm your guy.
Okay. On the topic of inflation, I would say, there's two competing philosophies out there, and it's still something that I'm still trying to figure out.
Sure.
Canada prints the money, first of all, right? Like we print the dollar, and we have a market that helps drive its value, and that market is largely out of the control of the Canadian government because it's based on how other markets treat our dollar. If they devalue our dollar, then our valuation, our purchasing power as a nation for outside goods changes. And that's where that inflation number can become problematic. I know people are telling me, we have to be careful of inflation. I push back a little, say, well, I know inflation's high right now, and inflation can tank countries like Zimbabwe, like Germany and the, pre-World War II. It can tank countries, and it has. But in 1970, our inflation rate was 3 times what it is, or twice what it is right now, and in the 70s and 80s. And so it's just unknown, right? It's a good point.
It's not
we
that,
have to think about inflation, but it's still unknown as to where it's going to go. The government putting all this money into the economy and overheating it and causing all the prices of living, like on food, like you say, on construction materials and demand and things like that. That might last, it might not. So it's kind of a, does inflation matter in this topic? Can we balance it with monetary policy, things like that?
Yeah, for me, it matters a lot because, again, we have to look at the people. I'm looking at the people, or I'm looking at my own situation. Most of us are teetering on the financial edge. We're 2 weeks away from needing help. We're a month, away from, oh my gosh, if I don't get my next paycheck, right? I maybe groceries are in question, or, kids got to not maybe participate in so many activities this year. So when we look statistically at the financial situation of our riding, I think it's very concerning to see inflation rising. we are the only party saying we'd like to have a 0% inflation. We would, I mean, it's an ambitious target, but it's like, it's something that we feel strongly about, and I do, because again, yes, you are right. It's not that a country or nation cannot recover, but I believe that if we continue to go down this track, and one of the main things that I question is how much of our money is going to foreign projects. For example, we spend billions of dollars on abortion clinics in Africa, in infrastructure into Africa. We spend $1 billion a year on the CBC. We spend a tremendous amounts of money on projects outside of our own borders, when right now I'm saying maybe now is not the time to be doing that. Let's pull back in. Let's get our deficit under control. And that way we've got power over our own inflation and destiny. Yes, there are always geopolitical or world issues. That's the name of the game. We can't escape that. We're part of the world, and we have to play with the world. But I do believe charity starts at home. We've got Native communities without clean drinking water. Why aren't these folks getting priority? So for me, my principle is Canada first. Let's put Canadians first. Let's pull back some of the foreign spending and foreign commitments. Let's bring our resources home and stimulate a small business economy. And then we can, kind of gather ourselves for more international play.
No, that makes sense. That's certainly a policy, right? There's you're focusing in-house. Certainly, we saw that with the United States under Donald Trump. There was there was a lot of turning inwards, and there's those competing philosophies out there on how that affects things, how it destabilizes the world, whatever. So, but I get it. That's the position, and that certainly aligns with the platform the PPC party has laid out on that policy, and I think that trickles down into a number of different issues. How do we play on the world market? How do we invest charitably as a country? How do we
immigration policies. We're the only ones saying we want to reduce immigration. Another thing is the housing market. One of the things we're saying is, well, what St. John Rossay is seeing, the rest of the country, Toronto, Vancouver, they've been seeing for many, many years, which is a huge influx of people coming from different nations. Right now, Justin Trudeau's government is wanting to increase us to 400,000 people a year. We're saying that is not sustainable. It's putting a lot of pressure on Canadians who have been here many generations, or have been here, who are already here. We're not against immigration, but what we're presenting is what we're calling sustainable immigration. 100,000 to 150,000 skill-based immigration policies, where we reduce the amount of immigrants we're bringing in, and we're bringing in, we believe our immigration policy should be in line with our economic needs. Right now, we feel that our immigration policies that the current Justin Trudeau government is working with is completely outside of what our economic needs right now. And Canadians here in St. John Rossay are feeling that pressure. As more people come from, look, I did it 12 years ago. Right, my family lives out here now and everything. All right, we're part, right? But as more and more, as housing becomes more unaffordable in the major centers in our country, guess what? That's going to spill out here. So what we want to do is reduce immigration to a sustainable number, which allows Canada to breathe and allows Canadians to breathe a bit, and then we can, we can manage the growth that we're bringing into the country.
Yeah, where's your family from, by the way? I forget where you're.
Yeah, I was actually born in Brazil. Right. We applied to come to Canada in 1987 and were denied because at that time, it's the same immigration policies that I'm presenting is why we were denied. And I'm okay with that, right? I'm totally fine with that. We were denied because that Canada had reached its quota. Well, look, to me, it's very simple. You want a great hockey team. You don't open up your hockey team to everybody. You want to go and bring the best players, so you create a strong hockey team. Well, that's what Canada was doing back then. It's what we want to continue to do. So we reapplied in 1988, and we came here in 1988, and we've taken on the identity. We went on to. I was a landed immigrant. Then I went on to do my Canadian citizenship and have my right to vote. And I believe in that process because that process actually helps me form a strong Canadian identity. This whole idea that Justin Trudeau is talking about being a post-national state, this again is about moving populations. This is about shifting us into a different type of culture. And I believe that Canada is actually better off keeping a strong national identity, but bring your flavor to the table. You know, multiculturalism is alive. And I believe Canada to be one of the, I've traveled around, you know, many countries around the world. I've had the opportunity to travel. Canada is one of the most inclusive places I've ever visited from all walks of life. And I think too much racial and identity politics and rhetoric is quite dangerous. And it's one of the reasons I got involved to hopefully cool that kind of political propaganda down.
Right. Okay. Well, we're hitting on a few policy ideas there. So I 100% I get where you're coming from. I guess the other part to me is like, you know, it's always about who's thy neighbor, right? Who's the neighbor that I'm going to look after, and you can't. It's hard when you see Afghans hanging off planes who were abandoned. It's hard when you see Syrians who
we're not talking about. I want to see. It always gets lumped into that category. I'm not talking about refugees and humanitarian issues. I'm talking about immigration policies, and there is distinction. Canada has always been a humanitarian nation, and I will always fight for Canada to help its neighbors and help those who need. War situations, climate disasters, we will be there. You know, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is our immigration policy and moving to a skill-based immigration policy as opposed to an open door policy, which is what we have now.
No, I get you. That's a good different differentiation to make, because it is different. You know, who qualifies for immigration, how we pick that out, what that process looks like. Then somebody's a refugee, so it's absolutely a good point.
Yeah, we have to make that distinction there. It's like a lot of things get lumped in together, and that's why I appreciate the long forum discussion, other than the 2-minute news clips, because it's very hard to get the more. And let's be real, like life is not black and white. Politics is not black and white, and there is negotiation and compromise and listening to different ideologies. And I will say this, and this is why I do appreciate you and some of the other candidates on council of I'll say the younger generation. I believe that the younger generation will do a lot better at, let's say, managing each other's differences of ideological perspective than the older generations, because I believe the younger generations are just like, I grew up with everybody. I grew up with, I mean, two of my best friends were often, the PPC is often painted as the far right, excuse me, were the racists, were the anti-gay, anti-this, anti-that. And I was like, it's so not true, right? All we're saying is we just want to keep a strong Canadian identity. And you want to be, and you have every right to have your sexuality and have every right to have your beliefs, and you have every right to bring your flavor and culture to Canada. We're not saying that. We're just saying, though, we want to make sure to stay united, to stay as a strong Canada. We have to also remember that we are Canadian. And if we keep that at the forefront, then you can be your flavor and do what it is that you want. We are fighting for freedom. We want you to be able to do what you want, but we're challenging the way in which it's being done. I feel like it's the opposite's happening. The more that we try to kind of prop up individual groups, the more we actually are creating division, because we're much more focused on how we're different. When I've traveled this country coast to coast. I've lived in Calgary, I've lived in Toronto, now I make my home in New Brunswick. We love it out here. And I will tell you that Canada overall, in my experience, is very welcoming, very nice. There's always, you know, excuse my language, but there's always an asshole somewhere there. Yep. But overall, the experience has been great and inclusive. And so I'm just I'm a little bit worried that the identity and racial politics is playing too much of a forefront right now in our country.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we'll keep moving on here. So that's good. I am just tracking along with these questions. And, you know, we mentioned housing. So we're going to we just talked into what we what we think the federal St. John needs from our next federal government, from our next candidate. You hit on a number of issues there, and some of them will have ticked off other questions. So I'm just going to sift through here.
Sure.
One of the things from city council. Now, we talked about money, and I think this is where one's going to hit home. So from a policy perspective, you mentioned that we want that part of the PPC's policy is constraining expenses, getting the fiscal house in order. One of the things that municipalities, so I'm going to put my hat on as a city councilor now.
Sure.
Municipalities don't have.
No, just right. Yeah.
City councils don't have levers to pull outside of what the provinces give them. So in New Brunswick, for example, we have arguably the most restrictive local government act, the LGA. It's called. It's got 100 plus sections within it. That basically spell out, these are the limitations of the municipality. These are what a municipality is. This is what a municipality must offer. For example, it may shock some people to learn municipalities have no requirement in law to provide fire prevention services. You would think, oh my gosh, that's one of the most important services that a town or city or village offers, but they actually in law have no obligation to provide that for people. Now, it gets weird because what happens if the city of St. John pulled that or the city of Miramichi pulled that? Would the province step in? And we don't know because it's never happened historically. It's one of these weird spots where municipalities just came in and did those things for their people. So it's shocking for people to learn that municipalities have 25% of the tax revenue in this country, and they have 60% of the infrastructure and costs. It's not a fair battle in many ways. We don't have any of the. We can't just we're going to raise taxes here, lower them here. We don't have those powers. So what the city has asked, what's the point of that? So going forward, municipalities are going to, if we're going to bear the brunt of the expenditures on water, on transit, on land use policies, and bylaw inspection officers, and police and fire, if we're going to bear those burdens for people and organize them at the municipal level, we're asking from the city of St. John that our next federal government begin to take off some of those provincial tie-ins. So what I mean by that is usually when the federal government wants to make an impact on a city, what they'll do is they'll make funding available for a program. Let's use transit, for example, because that's one that's top of mind for people right now with our bus services in St. John having been reduced recently. Sure. That's absolutely affecting the poorest individuals and the most common working class individuals in our city. Call them commoners. That's not what I meant to say, but you know what I mean. Like,
I'm a commoner. I'm up in the lower west, west, right?
Yeah. So it's like, okay, transit. Okay, the federal government made transit money available. Said, hey, we understand cities need to provide transportation for people. We're going to make it contingent on the provinces kicking in some money. So our province said, no, we don't want to spend. So they, in other words, the provincial government practiced that constraint policy of we're not going to spend money we don't have, right? The Higgs government said we're just going to hold this tight to our chest. We don't want to spend that money. What it ended up doing is disempowering and devaluing, or I guess more or less just disempowering a municipality's ability to provide that service. And so we ended up having to cut our transit back about 20,000 service hours. And so I guess the question out of all that is, and in that policy position paper that the city wrote and gave to all the candidates, is that something that you fight for as a candidate? Do you go to the federal government and say, look, if we're going to make meaningful change in our communities, we need to make these funding models that do exist, whatever we choose to do, strings free to help municipalities where they're needed most?
Yes, we do. Because I operate on the principle that government works better closer to the people, and the closest government body to the people is the municipality. You know, the whole idea of centralization is actually bad for local people. The culture in St. John, Rossay, in the Atlantic Canada is different than the culture in Quebec, which is different than the culture and the needs of Alberta or BC. That's Canada. Canada has a vast range of industries and culture and differences. So a federal government is ineffective. That's why all of this centralization and federal government power is bad for our country, in my perspective, because you on city council If I'm sitting in Ottawa and I'm dealing with national issues, it makes much more sense that you have the power locally to be able to act as the people here need. So the way that I would work with city council is I would say, tell me how Higgs is getting in your way, and I can then introduce legislation, or I can then introduce bills, or use the tactics of Parliament to then put pressure on the Higgs government or whoever the provincial leader is at the time, and say, hey, give up those restraints and let municipalities do what they need to do to improve their cities and to improve the life of their people. So principally, you can city council can count on me, and the city of St. John can count on me to give you more decision-making power, to give you more of your own funding back.
Is that a position now? I read the platform of the PPC. Is there a position there that has this built into it, where there's a call for decentralization from federal government to lower levels of government? Is that in there? Or
it's not like in there, but it's in there in principle, if that makes sense. It's our principle is we operate on 4 principles, and one of them is freedom. The second one is personal responsibility. And that means like from a philosophical perspective, we operate on that. A strong Canada is strong individual Canadians, which means lower taxes, keeping inflation rates down, at least below 1%, if not 0, reducing federal involvement and allowing provinces, and more so even municipalities, to operate themselves. We also don't believe that the taxes that are being collected here in the province, should then, be floated somewhere else. Sometimes in Canada, this has often been the complaint of Alberta, that Alberta pays for, maybe, a lot of things that are happening over east or in Quebec. Now, the Maritimes have to go some changes and shifts in the way that we're going to do things so that we can flourish and prosper. And I think one of the things is also making sure that our province opens up to new competition, that we allow other companies to come in here and flourish, so therefore we can also create job stimulation and growth. I much more feel, and here's another thing about the People's Party of Canada that are different than any other party. The People's Party of Canada has no internal policy that says I, Nicholas Pereira, cannot table a bill myself with or without the party's approval.
Right.
This is something that people should know about our party that's very different. I can represent St. John Rothsay and introduce a bill that's good for our people, whether the rest of the party wants to or not. So this is something that's very unique about the way that our party operates, which is very different than the establishment parties.
Yeah, the non-whipped vote piece. Absolutely. Yeah, that's it's one of those green ideas too. They tend to be on those, but there's no other party that doesn't do that. Even regional parties like the Bloc. I guess the Maverick Party, I'm not sure if they're doing that or not. They're the new kids on the block from the West.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty rare, and it's hard to say that you're going to whip votes and be able to get the best representation locally. I don't see how that works with the other parties. I don't believe it's possible. I get the idea. We're trying to have a controlled environment where we control the outcome, but at the end of the day, controlling it for who?
That's right.
And to your point, you talk about Alberta feeling a certain way about them being well, here in St. John, it always amazes people when I tell them, look, St. John produces 25% of New Brunswick's GDP, and it gets less than 18 cents on the dollar back for what's taxed here. And not only that, but the province can give tax exemptions to industries that are flourishing, like our mills. And I understand.
I'm with you. I'm with. I'm just like, I'm just shuddering.
It's so frustrating because we push back on their housing assessment prices, and those are anomalous. It's ridiculous.
The provincial government overall, without getting into details, in many sectors of the provincial government are ridiculous right now. And like, for example, affordable housing, I learned that actually the provincial government is sitting on millions of dollars that the federal government has set aside for them.
That's right.
For affordable housing. Why isn't Higgs using that money? There's many things that can be done right now.
He has no minister to spearhead it. And last he's quoted as saying he talked to landlords and landlords said there wasn't a problem. It's
landlords, but what about the renters? like what the there's more renters than landlords. Hello.
I know.
And I'm all for free market and stuff, like, that's a big PPC thing, right? Like, it's like free market and landlords have the right to put up their rents and stuff. I'm not against landlords. What I am saying is, though, that the provincial government could step in right now to help renters right now and to help homeowners. The provincial government, I wrote this in my notes. I just wanted to connect with this. The provincial government has a extra tax. Like, I think we're the only province that has almost like 2 tiers or 2 layers of taxes.
Well, it's a bit of a misnomer. They call it the double tax. That's what property owners like to call it. But the reality is New Brunswick gives a tax exemption on your first initial property that you live in, and you pay the full tax on the properties that you don't. So in the mind looking in, it looks like a double tax. Really, when you break down dollars to cents, the property tax percentages in New Brunswick are very similar to Nova Scotia and PEI and Newfoundland and Quebec. They're just framed differently. And so it gives the illusion that there's 2 taxes. But anyway, that's provincial. We'll leave that.
I was like, I can get into that, but we won't. That's provincial. Let's move on.
So what's the federal solution here? What do you envision at the federal level if we're talking about housing? And the PPC party is going to commit to honoring the free market. What's the solution? Because I'm not convinced that a free market entrepreneur is going to pick a lower income individual to be their client if they don't have to.
No, absolutely, right? That just makes sense, right? But at the same time, yes and no, because what we have a rise in is things like the tool library, in my opinion. Social type entrepreneurs is like a really new thing, and I think it's a cool thing. And again, it's something of the younger generation. It's interesting because entrepreneurs sometimes get a bad rap as being completely money hungry, but you know what? I run a business. Believe me, there's a lot of ways to make money, and trying to convince men to not watch porn and masturbate is not like the best. It's not one of the best, marks. So I am an entrepreneur that is not operated solely by money. Of course, I want to make money. Of course, I want to improve my situation. Of course, I want to have like everybody else wants to have. So I'm not going to deny that. But at the same time, you'll notice that there are many socially based entrepreneurs that have great ideas, projects and the younger generations. And this is where I believe the younger generations will have such a different perspective. Even though we may have different political viewpoints, I think we'll have better collaboration, because I think we understand that, look, there are necessities of the world the world is just a different place than it was even 10, 20 years ago. So what entrepreneurship may look like may be different. So one of the things that I talked about already, just to get into some policy, is that we will reduce immigration. This will help with housing because it will slow down the amount of new people that are coming in. Now, where I think that we can still have growth specifically for St. John Rosse is internal or a migration from other parts of the country. So by slowing down immigration, it cools the housing market. And by cooling the housing market, it allows both landlords and renters to have time to adjust. Now, the province we would put then pressure on the province and say, look, like BC did. BC put a rent freeze in to help some of their folks out. The province can do that. The province has close to what I understand, and maybe these numbers are wrong, but I understand they have up to $100 million right now to build affordable housing. So we can build some affordable housing, and we can still allow free market entrepreneurs to come in because they're getting the rents. So there's a demand. They can supply that demand, and the government, with the existing funds that they have, can then help some of the folks out that won't, like you saw, some of our elderly, our fixed income, be able to supply them with some housing.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying there. There's a supply problem, and we need to cool from a connection point to policy. If we cool people, I mean, it's hard to cool the migration in Canada, like all the people moving here all of a sudden. That's hard to control. But
that's hard to control.
Outside people coming in helps us catch up with the market.
Yeah.
I guess, it's always hard for me looking at it as a builder, and I know a lot of developers, and I've built homes. I've been on teams, I've been under contract. I don't see very many builders building lower income housing, cheaper housing, for the reason that they don't want to be bothered with unpredictable tenants. And we do, just like we developed a healthcare system that protected people and gave everybody sort of a floor of healthcare, we need to do the same with housing. I know that lies mostly in the provincial hands. So I don't want to say that you need to give a federal policy for that. But what I hear you saying is that
look,
we need to push it to the province, and we need the federal government to be there from a high level to control immigration flows.
That's right. And that is what we're saying. We're saying that actually the province has the resources and capabilities to do this. They need to manage their funds. They need to use the resources they have and not withhold it. And I don't know why they are. And from a federal level, right? Again, we're a federal party, so we don't make policies specific for ridings. But what's different about our party is that once I am your member of parliament, I can introduce bills that are specific for ridings. And like every member of parliament, and here's, I'm sorry, but I am going to get a little bit of look, a lot of the other candidates, they like to say we gave this much money to this and we gave this much money to that, and they use that as rhetoric to say what they've done. Anybody who occupies that seat will get federal funding as much as they can. That's a paperwork job, and we will do that. I will do that. Whatever funds that are available for our riding, of course, I'm going to be there fighting for that, putting in the paperwork and making sure we get that for what's there. But at the same time, I think that I want to be honest with Canadians and say we're broke. So we have to stop looking at the federal government for funding, and we need to start encouraging more entrepreneurship, more small businesses. Let's get more grassroots back into our whole as a whole. And let's support Canadian small businesses, because they will be able to hire more people in St. John than these big federal funding jobs. Much of those jobs, a lot of skilled labor that we don't have is needed. And so a lot of that job does not trickle down to the everyday person here in St. John Rothsay. But I figure if we work with small businesses and Canadian businesses, they have better opportunity to hire people here. And if we cool inflation down with good fiscal policies, people will have more buying power again. They'll feel more empowered as individuals.
Right. Yeah, it's I can see the dots connecting there for you for sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've spent enough time there. We got maybe a little more than 2 minutes. So I just want to take a peek here at questions that I have in here, and then I think there were a couple of comments that maybe I'm going to circle back to. Reg Sutton asked, what is the PPC policy on immigration? I'm just going to say, Reg, after this video goes live, circle back a little earlier, because Nick actually connects these dots for you on a couple of different issues, specifically on immigration. So we won't chew up that time here, but thank you for the question. And Nick answered it before. And then this one connects to some of the other stuff. And this was a question around local procurement. So I know that you said procurement policy and stuff, not your strong point, but you are already alluding to it. And there's a policy out there, and there's policies around the idea of repatriating supply chains, which is this idea of to say, if we're importing a bunch of things right now, what does the federal government, what does the provincial government, what does the municipal government need to do to try to create the environment for those industries to be here and occur naturally, so that we're not importing, that we're buying in-house. So is there anything else to that you've picked up on from the PPC platform that would help us see here, if you were our federal candidate, and you were working that angle, what would some of those policies look like that the PPC party is already working for?
Yes, sure. So ultimately, I mean, again, let's go to the principle level, is that we are for a free market. So we want to end corporate welfare or corporate bailouts. We want to stop pandering to these big companies, and we are for Canadians first. So meaning whatever we can do to protect Canadian consumers and make sure they're getting good pricing. So for example, we will create an open and fair system so that Canadians save billions of dollars annually as a whole, because they're going to be paying less for things, some of the basics like eggs and such. By phasing out supply management, we're basically phasing out a controlling body. That's ultimately what we're trying to do on many levels, is phase out these controlling bodies or these big lobbyist groups. So what we have is a very powerful lobbyist group that is anytime the idea of opening up Canada, or opening up, let's say, eggs or poultry to different markets, or allowing
even maple syrup.
Yes, that's right. Anytime these type of things come up, there's a particular lobbyist group for these companies that's very powerful, very active, and it gets shut down. And we are saying that we need to face that lobby, not that lobbyist group per se, but we need to look at this and open up the debate on making sure that Canadians, especially as things get more expensive right now, we have to do everything that we can to make sure that people can afford groceries and can afford the basics of life, and so that way they can make sure they have the basics there. And that means about opening up the free market and opening up the debate about supply chain management.
Yeah, and that certainly. Supply chain management is one of those things, right, where there are good reasons to think for both ways.
I have a friend. I'll tell you.
Yep.
I on a personal note, I have a friend who has an egg farm, right? And I know that right now, as I speak, he would see this as detrimental to his business and such.
Yes.
And so I understand that exists, and it's quite, it's a controversial or polarizing topic, as so many topics are of this election, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to open up the debate. I feel my job is to represent we're the People's Party, meaning I don't represent corporations. I don't represent lobbyist groups. I represent what is best as I can. What does the general population, which are, the working class folks of our riding, the majority of us, what is best for us? And competition, in my opinion, is best for us because it allows us choice and it allows prices to stay competitive for us.
Yep, it's like I said, you talk. That totally makes sense. On the other side, you have people that will argue until they're blue in the face that if we do that, then we're going to cause boom and bust cycles in the economy. Right. And the dairy farmer is going to be rich one year and he's going to be broke the next. And that's no good for me. So but I get your point, right? It's the People's Party's position, and your piece of that is to say, look, I think it's worth having the debate. Maybe we've gone too far. What does it look like to relax or remove?
And this is where politics comes in. That's why the balance is needed overall. I think we started the conversation where I said there is a balance. There's a reason Canada has worked really well overall. Yes, right. We have our challenges. Yes, like any nation, we've got our history that some of it we're not proud of. But overall, we've worked pretty well comparatively to the rest of the world. And I believe it's because we've always had a good representation of ideologies that had healthy debates. And I think it's something that I want to bring back. Let's just, without getting so heated and so so like, I can't have a drink with you after type of thing.
Oh yeah, that could in politics, especially if you're on. Well, I hate to throw any platform under but especially it seems on Twitter, things can go.
That's the wild west of the internet.
Man, things can go so far outside of the context of which they began. You think,
totally.
My gosh, I don't even know how this is possible. Well, you know what? It was great, Nick. I thank you for making yourself available tonight to make your positions kind of more clear, for this to kind of trickle down into a St. John specific reality and policy level. So I think that's helpful for people. And best of luck in the campaign. You've got. You said a federal. You got a candidates debate coming up tomorrow. I think, is that with the Human Development Council?
Yeah, there's the one tomorrow with the Human Development Council, and then there's one at UNBSJ at 6 p.m. on Wednesday. So a few times we'll get to interact and with the rest of the candidates, and hopefully have some good discussions with them.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll sign off for tonight. It's been an hour. So obviously, people, I see some comments here. I know Nick will kind of track through those and respond. They'll live here on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. So anybody who's made those comments, also, I'm sure you can reach out to Nick. He's got a campaign up on Facebook. I think you've got a campaign on Twitter as well. They can find you on the PPC website. So I think I saw somebody said they're looking for a sign. So anyway, you can hit Nick up for that.
Sure.
And we'll sign off for tonight. We're still waiting, just for the audience at home. Just know we're still waiting to set a time up with Ann McAllister. She's running for the Greens. We haven't nailed down a time yet. And then Mel Norton also hasn't nailed down a time with me yet. I'm looking forward to doing that if he has the availability. But we might hit a home run and get all of them. But Ann's next. I think she's just waiting to get these debates out of the way. And then we've got another week next week, and we got the federal debate this week. So anyway, we'll be chiming in and be tracking along. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you. Bye-bye.